Here on Fountain Street, in Strabane, County Tyrone, on the 18th of August 1971, at the height of the Troubles, a deaf man, Eamonn McDevitt, aged 28, was shot dead by the British Army.
When it's one need in the night, one love, we get to share it. Leaves you, baby.
It's now widely accepted Eamonn was unarmed when he was shot, but this was denied by the army in a BBC News report at the time.
In Fountain Street, children lined up to pay tribute at a shrine set up to mark the spot where 24-year-old Eamonn McDevitt, a deaf-mute, was shot dead by a soldier. Some local people are strongly denying the Army's statement that McDevitt was himself carrying a gun. 23 signatures from people who claim this to be so have been collected by Mr John McKelvey.
One soldier was searching an individual. This soldier is reputed to have said, "They are shooting up there." And he ran forward, got down on one knee and fired one shot. The priest who attended the young man, gave him the last rites of his church immediately after the incident, asked where the weapon was, and nobody could produce it.
Since Eamonn's death, his family have been campaigning to clear Eamonn of all wrongdoing. Eamonn's brother, Sammy, still lives here in Strabane.
Have you come to raise the dead?
Well, Eamonn was a very happy-go-lucky fellow. He would have his own mind. Where he wanted to go, he would have went. Well, he went to a friend of his called Mrs McDevitt, which can sign language. So he went to her to have conversations and chat and maybe have a bit of dinner. But he left her out to the States. She tried to convince him not to go, to stay in the house till it was all over. But no, he left and he went on down, and he must have met the rioters, wherever they were doing, coming up. He would have had no fear of the army at all, because I myself was in the army, anyway. Very shortly after that, a neighbour came, and he says, there's no easy way of putting this, he says, but he says, Eamonn's been shot. I've been shot. Couldn't happen. It was just devastation. It was just disbelief. Well, personally, I think, as an ex-soldier, he was picked out because he was the most prominent target, the tallest target, and he could be seen above everybody else. And the army policy at that time was take the biggest target, the clearest target out, and everybody else will run.
I was watching the news at 6 with my wife. It was the time of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and quite often you'd see the same kind of news every evening. But when we saw the photo of a deaf man, I recognised him immediately from the photo. It was Eamonn McDevitt. To my dismay, I realised he must have been shot. It was dreadful. Such a shock. He was a schoolmate of mine at St Joseph's in Cabra.
My own leading troops spotted this man carrying a weapon. He was spotted by 2 or 3 Marines and was clearly carrying a gun.
The news that night was the commander of the soldier that was there said he was brandishing a gun, and I was disbelief. It was unbelievable what they were saying.
And at the time when this gunman raised the weapon, he brandished it, he came up on aim, one of my Marines fired a shot and killed him.
They committed murder that day, and that's all I can say about that.
The Pat Finucane Centre is a human rights group who support families who have lost someone during the Troubles. Eamonn's family has been working with them.
Hello, Paul.
Sammy, how are you? See, on one point, the witnesses, both civilian and military, coincide, and that is that some minutes before he was shot, he'd picked up a rubber bullet during the riot. Rubber bullets were being fired, tear gas was being fired, and it was somewhat of a game at that stage among young people to lift rubber bullets and to play with them. And he'd picked up a rubber bullet, he had been waving it in the air, that when he came into Fountain Street, that local people, a local woman called on him to throw away the rubber bullet because she understood that it was dangerous to have one in his hand at this point in time. He did give it to her and she testified to that effect. We have that statement, we know who that is. All the civilians coincide in that at that stage, shortly before he was shot, Eamonn had nothing in his hand. He'd given away the rubber bullet and he was simply there at the side of the road. The shooter himself isn't interviewed for 6 days. Now, if you were involved in a car accident where even someone was injured, and the police decided not to interview for 6 days, everyone would say that was incorrect.
There's something wrong.
There's something wrong. Yeah. There's something terribly wrong. So for 6 days, they had time to sit down and get their story right.
My wife and I went to the Deaf Club that Friday. There were loads of people there, all discussing what happened to Eamonn McDevitt. I stood up and suggested that we plan a protest at the British Embassy, protesting at British soldiers shooting and killing deaf and other people, such as the disabled, the blind and so on. The response was muted, but they agreed. Some were more apprehensive. We walked down Grafton Street. Onlookers applauded when they saw us, protesting, holding placards. There were no problems, and everything was going well. We marched around Merrion Square. When we arrived, we were greeted by a large police presence down at Holles Street. Tony McElhatton, Christy Foran and I held the placards over there in front of that building, and I walked up and handed the letter to the British Embassy, which was in this building at the time. They opened it. I think the police were afraid I might become violent, but no, I walked out onto the steps and we had a 3-minute silence in memory of Eamonn McDevitt. Thank you very much for taking part in this march today.
Eamonn's case was being reviewed by the Police Service of Northern Ireland's, the PSNI's, Historical Inquiries team. Its job is to re-examine all deaths linked to the Troubles.
Of course, what he's not saying is that he was given a specific order not to fire.
That's correct.
And after he fired, the officer called out who gave the order to fire, who fired.
Who fired that shot?
The HET produced a number of draft reports, and the situation to date is that the draft report would be supplied to an organisation, an NGO like our own, or to the family, and we would go back and say, look, we disagree on that, we think you've got that wrong, you haven't interviewed soldiers, you haven't interviewed all the civilian witnesses and so on. We were in the middle of that process, actually waiting for the soldiers, the former soldiers, to be interviewed when the HET was suspended over the summer.
Some elements of the work of the Historical Inquiries team are currently suspended. This follows an official inspection, which raised questions about how some reviews were being carried out. In particular, those that related to the Army. At present, they are awaiting approval of the Northern Ireland Policing Board before continuing their work. This could take months. In the meantime, Eamonn's family is still waiting for his name to be cleared.
I know we've had a couple of drafts from the HET, Historical Society, but with them being closed down at the minute, investigation, and the PSNI has taken over, I don't feel we'll get the truth.
It's our belief, the belief of the family, the belief of many people in this community, that the PSNI should police the present, but they should not police the past. That's toxic. There is not the level of confidence or trust in the police in the north to investigate the actions of the British Army. Under no circumstances would that be acceptable.
That's all we want, is an apology, both verbal and written, that they were wrong and that they were sorry for what happened. That's all we want.